Morning, everybody. Dave Whitmarsh here from Whitmarsh Consulting Group. I'm with Steve Cunningham over at Adaptive, and today we're going to run you through a presentation focusing around People's Development Playbook. So Steve and I have actually done this presentation once before, which is great because if we botch this one, then we can use the other recording. So I'll turn it over to you, Steve. You want to maybe give yourself a little introduction, and we can get going.
Thanks for being here, everybody. My name is Steve Cunningham. I am the Chief Product Officer at Adaptive, and we're going to be talking about today how to create a people development playbook. So the agenda for this session, just so we can get our bearings as we're moving through here today, we're going to talk about the problem that most organizations face in people development. We're going to talk about the solution. So how do you solve the problem that we're going to address? And then finally, how do you go about creating a playbook around that solution? And we'll leave a little bit of time for Q&A if you have any questions there at the end. So what we found through our work throughout the last decade is that the vast majority of team leaders say that growth and development is critical for their team success. Not surprising. Team members say that their growth and development is critical for their personal success. Again, that's not surprising. But what is surprising is that team leaders struggle to get their team to make time for learning, apply what they learn, or both. So we have the situation where everybody wants everybody to be developed, but it simply doesn't happen. And the problem that we've found is that despite spending millions of dollars on content, live training, and learning management systems, the vast majority of leaders struggle to get their people to invest their time and energy in their growth and development. And we found that the source of that problem is a focus strictly on content. And we're going to walk you through exactly how this problem manifests itself. So typically what we find inside of a company is that they're at a stage of growth around their learning and development function. It typically starts off with buying a single content library when the company is usually fairly small, and there's some initial excitement in the organization around that, and then basically the curve of engagement, if you look at the usage, goes from very, very good for a few days and then down to almost nothing. And the conclusion that the organization typically makes at this point is that, well, this first content library wasn't compelling enough, so we're going to go to try find more and better content libraries. So then they go and do that, and there's some initial excitement around this new content library, and then mostly nothing. So again, that big curve going from high engagement down to no engagement very quickly. So then this is happening over some period of time, and the organization will then regroup and say, why are we not getting any engagement? And the conclusion will be, well, now that we have all these content libraries, the reason there's no engagement is that because people are so confused, they have all these different places to log in, and they're forgetting the fact that none of these content libraries were ever engaging at any one time. But anyways, they go off and buy an LMS to get all of that stuff into one place. This time, there's no excitement because nothing has actually changed in terms of the content and the experience for the employees, and then there's very low engagement again. So that's the next stage. Then the conclusion here is, well, maybe there's not enough structure, so we need to organize our content better. And then the next step is they'll create some competency models. And this, again, it creates no excitement in the organization. And what it does drive actually is a check the box mentality at the end of the year. And we'll actually talk a little bit about that in more depth in a second. And then, so nothing happens again. Then there's this conclusion that, well, we need to hold people accountable. And this is where we find most organizations are right now, is that they're mandating content consumption. And what ends up happening here is that basically nothing happens until the end of the year, and then everybody gets in a worry about what's going to happen at review time. And then there's a lot of what we call pencil whipping. They'll log in, they'll go try to fake doing a lot of content consumption in the system, dragging videos across, and basically doing a lot of make work at the end of the year, which nobody is happy about. And then the conclusion at this point is, well, our people must not be motivated enough to get better, and they just accept the problem. So that is what happens at the company level. What we found is that this is how your team leaders and your team members experience this at their level. So whenever the company has a new training, great, we got access to this training. They tell the team is excited because they're always looking for opportunities to develop and grow. And then they circle back in, a couple months later, how's it going? Well, I'm too busy right now. All those things that were on our plate this month, I'll do it next month. Next month rolls around, how's it going? I'm too busy right now. How's it going? I'm too busy right now. And then eventually it gets to the end of the year and the team leader says, fine, just go watch X number of videos so we can check the box in the performance review and neither of us will get fired. Fine, we'll go do some make work when we've got all of this other stuff we're supposed to be doing. So nobody ends up excited and happy about the experience that's been created.
Yep.
So
can I just interject, Steve? So I absolutely love the way that you did that, and truthfully, I think that's floating around in so many people's brains as far as the process that they've been through. And congratulations, it's the first time I've actually seen it documented in a flow. And what's really nice, which you'll get to, is how you fix that solution. But I'm sure the folks on board here watching the session can appreciate that and have been through that pain, within the organization, either currently or in the past. So I just love that slide so much.
Yeah, so we've just seen that over and over again. And it seems to be a truism. That is the conversation that happens in every organization. So that's what happens at the company level. That's what happens at the team level. And this is typically what happens at the executive level. So executives check in, how's our people development coming along? HR says, great. We got lots of new exciting programs. How are we measuring success? Well, we're going to look at engagement and the content. Okay, but how does that get us better business results? And the explanation is usually something like, if they're consuming the right content and they apply it to their job, they'll get better results. Executives who are getting less and less enthused about all of this will then ask, how do we know that they're applying it to their job? Typically, organizations will send out a survey some months later asking them, did you apply this to your job? Which of course is no good indication of whether or not they did. And it certainly doesn't help them do it from the beginning. And then finally, then the executives will ask, but how do we ensure they're applying it to the role and that the business results are improving, which is the only thing that they care about. And then eventually we have to admit that we don't know, because most organizations, even though they're using what is commonly known as the Kirkpatrick evaluation model with how do you like the training at the bottom, which most organizations would call smile sheets, and then you've got business results at the top of the pyramid, followed right below that by behavior change. What we have found is that there are no organizations who actually understand exactly what behavior change is happening, and thus there's simply no way to measure the results. So what we want to now talk about is, how do we solve this problem so that when you walk into the boardroom and have this kind of a conversation with the executives in your company, you are able to say, we know exactly what behavior change is happening, and because of that, we know exactly what results we are getting. And it all comes down to boiling all of that into the process from the very beginning. So to circle back, what ends up happening when you have this focus on high quality content and engagement in content is, even if you win this game, even if you get to high quality content and high engagement in that content, you're still in what we would end up calling a dead zone, because nothing is actually happening. Behavior change is not happening, most likely, and certainly not business results. And what we want to talk about for the rest of this presentation is, how do we get out of that dead zone and into what we call the adaptive zone? And we're going to be talking about, for the rest of this presentation, how do we get leaders engaged in the development of their people? And then how do we hold team members accountable, not only for consuming content, but for changing their behavior and creating better business results? So the solution is to focus on leader involvement and development at every level in your organization, and holding team members accountable for excelling in their current role and getting ready to take on the next role. And this is what ends up happening in this framework. So we're going to talk about, how do we get into this high accountability, high leader engagement portion in what we call the adaptive zone, which basically means this is the zone where people are actually changing for the better. So the first thing we do is we identify what we call the career aspirations of your team. This is what actually is most important to all of your team members. This is what they would engage in. If you could make it very clear where they ultimately want to be and what the next step is in the organization for them, that is something they can get excited about. That is something they can get engaged in. So we're going to talk about that. And basically what that requires in order to get people engaged in this process is to map out the skills required in each of the roles in your company across 4 different types of skills. Number 1, role skills. So these are the things that need to be done on a day-to-day basis in this role. So things that will probably show up in a job description. The required skills, which is our term for anything that would be compliance related or things that you just need to get done in order to remain compliant. Then leadership and soft skills, which are most organizations might combine those two into the same competency model, but basically we've separated them because we know that for some folks in your companies, they're going to remain at a frontline level, and perhaps they don't want to extend into a manager role, or like this very ambitious person that we're going to talk about become the CEO of the company. So again, here's what a flow might look like for somebody who's starting as an inside sales rep. They want to become inside sales manager next, and eventually become the CEO. So giving them visibility to all of the skills required in each one of those roles across the organization is really going to help them understand what do they need to do, and also understand what do they want to do. Because if they can understand what is required in each role, that's one of the elements that is going to help them navigate this maze and ultimately win this game. So the second thing we need to make sure we do is we have an objective framework to assess where folks are at in these skills. And the thing I want to point out here is that this is not a performance review rating scale. This is not where you think somebody's a 2 out of 5 and they think they're a 4 out of 5, and you have a really difficult conversation around it. These are very clear progressions in the skill, whatever particular skill we're talking about. So I just want to walk you through this framework, and you can use this framework, you can use another framework, but what's important is that you're documenting something that tells that person exactly what they need to do in order to progress. So the first level, 0, is they haven't completed the required training. The second level is they've completed the required training in the skill area. So they've taken the course that they're supposed to be on, they've consumed the videos that you've uploaded for them, they've attended the classroom training that you've set up. It doesn't really matter which thing that is, but it needs to be clear that this is what you're supposed to do. Now, this is where most organizations start and stop. It's all about the content consumption, but of course, what we care about is, did you change your behavior and did it lead to better results? So we put the onus back on the team member and the manager to make sure that we're documenting. How did you progress through the rest of these steps? So the next step, obviously, is, have you applied what you learned to your job? And if you have applied what you learned to your job, you should be able to articulate what happened to your manager. So you would, that would be, I went off, I took the training, I went into the field, this is how I applied this technique that I learned, and here's what happened. That would be an objective, yes, you are at level 2. Level 3 is that there's a documented process and you're following it. Sometimes in organizations we will work with, we'll have standard operating procedures and work instructions for these skills. So you can simply move somebody quickly to a 3 if they can show that they're following the process. Or what happens in more organizations that we work with is that there are no documented ways of doing things, and that this is an opportunity for that to happen. And this is critical because if you have a group of people who have these skills, you want to have the very best of them document what they're doing so that the rest of the team can understand exactly how to do it. And we get this cycle of improvement from peer sharing, which we'll talk about in a second. So we've got a process and we're following it. And the fourth level is we're following the process and it's producing the desired results. So when we're talking about role skills here, what this means is that you are, in some cases, and hopefully in most cases, attaching either an objective or a KPI, and you're saying, yes, by doing it this way, we're getting this result that we're supposed to get. So that's how we know whether or not the training is actually connected to better business results. And then finally, once we get them to that level, the next step is turning them into an expert, which basically means they're willing and able to teach the skill inside their team or organization. So again, taking the very best of what is inside the heads of the people that are already in your company and making sure that that gets shared and that people have a process for showing that they are doing it and it's producing the right result. So
sorry, Steve, that's so incredibly valuable, right? You think about the architecture in a lot of organizations that you have, that one person that knows where to go, and creating the process or the willingness to share that information really just strengthens the knowledge right across the whole team. So I love the addition to that step.
Yeah, it's where you actually create this this culture of learning and growth, is when because you can't have an expert until they can prove that there's a process and the process produces the right result. So it actually gets the business result that the organization is looking for, and then it also gets the very best information shared internally. And this is a process, by the way, that is very engaging to people, because as they're going through this, they're actually, the bigger picture for them is what I'm doing is I'm working towards my dream role. So this is something that is very clear to them and also is very motivating to them. And at the end of the day, the business gets what they want, which is better business results. One of the things that, one of the questions that we've often had around this is, millennials come into the organization, you may have heard this one before, and they want everything handed to them right away. They want to become a leader tomorrow when they haven't even been in the role for 2 or 3 months. And what we have found in our work is that this actually is a characterization of millennials that is just not partially true, but not the complete story. What they want to understand is, tell me exactly what I need to do, and I'll just put my head down and get to work and doing it. And the problem that we see is that most organizations aren't able to tell them exactly what they need to do to progress in their career, and thus they get frustrated. But as soon as you hand them, here, let's have a conversation, let's figure out where you ultimately want to be and what your next role is, and let's map out the path for you. That is a conversation that goes very well and that they are hyper engaged in, because now they know what to do. They have a plan. So that is basically that step. Now that we have the set up, what we do is we assess their current state, and then we create a plan to close the gaps. And so everybody then ends up having a very clear plan of where I am today and where I need to be tomorrow in order to progress to the next role. So that's the solution. And now let's talk about, how would you implement this in your organization? And we're going to go over 4 simple stages that need to happen. So you need to set up a skill model. You need to train your managers to become development coaches, because right now they simply don't know how to do this. Third, we need to make sure that there's a regular cadence of check-ins with the managers and their direct reports. And then we need to make sure that at the end of the year, when you're going to go in front of the executive team and present the plan for the next year, that we've got tangible results to show, and that we also have a recalibration plan for the next year to show how does our learning and development plan map into the strategic objectives in the company. And so we're going to go through these steps. And one of the things that we often hear from team leaders and HR executives is something along the lines of, we know we need to do this if we could only find the time. This all seems great, seems wonderful, seems like it's going to solve our problems, but we have so much on our plate. So we want to talk about, as we're going through, and I just want you to keep this in mind, that we can get this done in as little as 30 minutes a month. We found that the success of any initiative like this relies on our ability to chunk it down into small steps that people can wrap their arms around and fit into their currently insanely busy schedule. So let's go through the first step, which is creating the skill model. So as we've already talked about, what we need to do for all of these roles is map out what are the skills required, what are the role skills, what are the required skills, what are the leadership skills, and what are the soft skills. So when we're working with an organization, there's two ways that we can work with an organization. Some organizations have roles and responsibilities. They have job descriptions for each one of the roles. And that's a great place for us to start. We take those and then we build out your skill model based on that. And we even map onto your roles, the leadership and the soft skills that we believe are good fits for those roles. And then we collaborate and nail down exactly what that skill model looks like. If you don't have roles and responsibilities for each one of those roles, we would work with you to create those quickly and seamlessly so that we're creating this clarity for everybody in the organization. And even that step alone is a very valuable step because as soon as everybody understands exactly what their roles are and what their responsibilities are, you're now able to hold people accountable for doing the things that they need to do to excel in their role. So that's the first step. We end up then creating a skill development plan for each person in the company. So everybody knows exactly where they are, where they need to be, and what needs to happen in order to close that gap. So we're creating a plan, very simply put. And in organizations that are using learning development plans, we typically find that these are done on paper and they're typically brought up again at the end of the year, and no real conversation happens around them. So the system that we have allows for you, and allows, more importantly, for the managers to have these ongoing skill development conversations so that we know exactly where people are throughout the year. Because if the work doesn't happen throughout the year, it just doesn't simply get done.
Steve, just before you, about those skills and competencies that people would put in, is that much of an undertaking to load those into the system?
The loading of it into the system itself is not that much of an undertaking. Sometimes there's a lift on actually creating the skill model itself if there's not clear roles and responsibilities throughout the organization. So it really depends on where the organization is at, and we do a quick assessment and then we map out a plan for getting that done. So the thing that we would want to communicate around that is that the work on your plate is going to be very low, and we would take that off your plate and just get that done for you, because we know that just like everybody else says they're busy, folks in HR and learning are as busy or more busy. So we take all of that work off their plate.
Yeah, probably a good time just to reevaluate that and do it right going forward, right?
Yeah, exactly. It is a great time. Upskilling and reskilling is becoming a very important thing. Being adaptable in the current business climate with all the change that's going on, this is a great time to create a foundation for your plan moving forward.
Really,
Once we get those development plans loaded into the system, what we then start to see at a team level and across the organization is basically a compelling scoreboard that we can look at, and more importantly, for a manager to be able to pull up all of their team and see across all of the skills, the role skills, the required skills, the leadership skills, the soft skills, where everybody stands, what work is happening, and who are our fives, who need to train our ones and our twos, and so on. So it gives them a very clear view of how can we connect the right people together in the organization to make sure that this development actually occurs. And we preload the system when we hand it back to you with the content library that's filled with leadership and soft skills. And most organizations that we work with don't have a clearly defined leadership and soft skill plan. And we have some excellent content in 36 plus competencies that you can use in order to have that beginning of a leadership and soft skill plan for your folks. So that's the setup. Now we move into the next step, which is we need to make sure, now that we have this great model set up, the thing that is required in order to bring this to life is that managers need to be trained to become development coaches. And without this, the system kind of falls apart. And again, we want to make sure that we communicate that we can get this done quickly and simply for you. It's not complicated, but it does require some training and instruction. And basically, there are two things that managers need to do, understand how to do, in order to become a very compelling development coach. The first one is they need to know how to have these long-term conversations. How do we connect the path that this person wants to be on with the objectives of the company, so and also be able to keep this conversation alive. So it cannot be a once a year thing where we quickly check in. This needs to be a conversation that happens multiple times a year. And what we find is that most managers don't do this is simply because they don't have a process for doing it. It's not complicated, but when they don't have a script for it and they don't know exactly what to do, the tendency is just to not do it because it takes too much headspace to get that done. And the second thing they need to be able to do is have these short-term conversations where we're progressing people through these areas. We need to know, how do you have a conversation to go from a 0 to a 1? And how do you know to have a conversation from a 3 to 4? And they're different conversations because, from a 0 to 1, we're taking somebody who hasn't done the training they were supposed to do. How do we make sure that, how do we follow up and get them to do the training? Versus a 3 to a 4 is really a business problem solving exercise that's much more in depth. And so as an example, well, actually I'll have the example here in 1 second. And how we do this for organizations is we have what we call development coach bootcamp. So very quickly, over a span of a few weeks, we work with the managers. It's not a 3-week full program. It's about an hour a week over a few weeks, and it's based on the way that people get turned into people developers at Toyota, which is basically the organization that has started and is most well known for having a culture of coaching and development up and down their organization. You can't be a manager in Toyota without being a people developer. So we're taking that process and we're using it as a way to train your managers how to become a development coach. So here's an example. So the conversation between a 3 and a 4, which means there's a documented process and somebody's following it, and they're also not getting the right result. We got to figure out a plan to get them from a 3 to a 4. And so the conversation goes something along the lines of, we need to create a plan to try something different because what we're doing right now is not working. And then the next time we meet, we got to look at the results, and we got to keep doing that until we get a better result. Then once we do get a better result, which again is what the business wants, we then turn that person into that level 5 so that that can be trained across the organization. So again, not complicated, but there is a process to follow between each one of these steps to make sure that the right things are happening and that business results are coming out on the other end. And we also train your managers to train leadership and soft skills as well. So what we're helping you do is drive a lot of this training down into the organization so we can get it off of your plate. And this is actually where most of these trainings should happen, because the people that are delivering the training and should be following up on the training should be the people who are working with the people day to day. So we give them actually an interactive and engaging leadership and soft skill training program that they can use with each one of their direct reports. And again, workshop materials that they can use to coach their folks through this process out of all of the core competencies that you would want a leader and a direct report to be focusing on. And we created this process through the crisis about a year ago, and brought this process into a very engaging virtual experience. So one of the things we found last year is that most organizations are trying to create an engaging virtual experience. We tested a format, over hundreds of workshops that we ran very early in the crisis, and created a flow that works every single time. We're working with Fortune 500 companies around the world, deploying the system into their leadership development programs, and up and down the chain. This is a process that your people will find hyper engaging. And we're happy to walk you through this, by the way. One of the offers that we'll have coming out of this workshop is we are happy to run one of these classes for your organization free of charge to get you to experience it, to decide if this is something that you want to do.
Right. And if anybody happened to be on that morning introduction session today with Anissa and I, Anissa talked about this, and she said it was, I can't remember her exact quotes, but I think she said it was a game changer. It turned things upside down. and so she, as the CEO of her own coaching firm with over 1,000 people in her network, just totally loves that concept. So
Yes, it's a concept that leaders are excited about because it's a process. And number one, there's a series of steps that need to be followed, which makes it very clear what needs to happen. And the end results is that there is hyper engagement around the things that you care about, which is people setting goals in this matrix or this progression. So they're leaving with things to do. They're very engaged while they're there. They're leaving with things to do, and there's objective things that can be followed up on afterwards. So it's one of those things where we went, our process for action class, if we were looking at on this scale, we created a process, it creates the right results. So it's a 4, and now we're teaching other organizations how to deploy it. So we are a 5 when it comes to creating compelling virtual training experiences. And then, so as an example, they would be asked some very simple questions. And the most important question is, what is your skill goal and by when? And when we're talking about leadership and soft skills, what we mean by a result in those areas is a set of behavior statements. Because when we're talking about role skills, the things we do on a day-to-day basis, there's going to be a number in most cases attached to that end result or an objective that has been set. In leadership and soft skills, it's a little less clear. And so we can make it as clear as we can by saying, here's the set of behavior statements that need to be true of you in order for us to say that, yes, you are a 4. So we've got a library of these behavior statements that we can use and map onto a competency model that gets deployed in your organization. So again, the critical thing here is clarity for folks of knowing exactly what it is they need to do in order to progress. And that's what these behavior statements give you. Some organizations would call this a competency model. And this is part of what we deploy into the system. Here, just a partial listing of some of the competencies that we have in the system and a list of the workshops that come along with them. And we'll spend a ton of time on this, but we're happy to share this in more detail if you want to have a further conversation with us after this call.
Yeah, and you can just see some of the big names behind some of those modules. It's brilliant stuff.
And so that gets us to, okay, now we got the skill model, we got managers trained. And again, this is happening mostly through work that we're doing. We're taking that off your plate. Now it's time to actually engage the direct reports in this process. And so the managers simply create a regular cadence of meeting with their direct reports. We would typically suggest that it just becomes part of their regular one-on-one meeting. So adding a few minutes to whatever regular cadence they already have. The more we can just embed what we're doing into the flow of the work that they're already doing, the more likely it is that this succeeds. So rather than making this a big thing that they got to do and it feels like something that is being added to their work, we want to just add it into the pockets of time that are already there. So there's a regular meeting cadence. We provide all the tools that can make this work in as little as 30 minutes a month. Typically, we suggest that happens in, even breaking down those 30 minutes into multiple chunks. The standard for most one-on-one meetings is you should be meeting once a week quickly rather than once a month or once a quarter in more depth. And so we want to make sure that that is happening. And then, the system itself takes care of all the time-consuming admin tasks, like following up on moving zeros to ones and making sure that overdue items are being looked after. So we're taking a lot of these things that, in order to make the system work, would need to be done manually by a leader or sometimes by you as somebody in HR, following up with who did the compliance training and making sure you're emailing. You're sitting down at 8 o'clock at night on your couch with your laptop, emailing people, reminding them to finish their compliance training. That's not stuff that's adding value to your role. So we're going to take all of those things off for you and also take all of those things off the plate for the managers in the system. And so there's a development check-in module in the system that would basically say, here is the flow for the meeting when you're meeting with your direct reports. There's a place for the manager to put in the items they want to cover, for the team member to put in the items they want to cover, any upskill requests. So how the grading of these progressions happens in the system is it's a self-assessment by the team member, and then the manager needs to verify it. So there is a closed loop on this. It enables the employee to say, I'm ready to go from a 3 to a 4. And then in the conversation, it needs to be clear to the manager that that is true. And then they document that it is true. And that's how the closed loop accountability happens. Then, we're covering skills that are due soon, skills that are overdue. So all the things that you would need to talk about with your direct report to make sure that they are progressing in their development. Again, happening on a regular basis, whether it's monthly or weekly, it's moving that ball forward down towards the end of the year. And then there's a place in the system for each one of the skills that we're working on called a skill journal. And so typically somebody's going to be working on 3 to 5 skills at any one time. And we have a spot in the system for them to document where they're currently at, their skill goal, so where they want to be, any takeaways and reflections from implementing the training, and then any action items that need to be done. And there's a distinction here between items that the manager is adding, which you would see here in the square, that the items that the team member is adding, which are circles. And so one of the things that you're able to do as a manager, let's say you're a director, that you can skip down into the manager's direct reports and look at what is happening, what is the plan to get somebody from a 3 to a 4. And again, most of the action is going to be happening around these 3 to 4s. This is about improving performance in important areas. So understanding who is working on what and being able to have a conversation around the plan to get from where they are to where they need to go is critical. And so finally, we're executing this throughout the year. You're going to have reports saying, here are the managers who are doing a good job of it, here are managers who are not. And again, giving everybody the opportunity to be engaged in this process. And because of the way it's set up, the accountability gets sent down into the organization. So part of the accountability for, let's say, again, let's use a director, manager, frontline employee flow. The director is going to hold the manager accountable for developing their direct reports in the one-on-ones that they're having with the manager. So again, you're pushing down the chain of accountability. So all of this is happening without you needing to be the one to crack the whip, so to speak.
Right. Hey, let's just talk about that word accountability there, because depending on your perception of it, it really does have an interesting spin, right? So accountability, if some equate to liability, right? And I think if you really look at in this case, accountability means that you've sat down with an employee and you've determined, or they have told you where they want to go and what skills they want to develop and how they see themselves in your organization down the road. So when we mention the word accountability, it's really just holding them to their goals, right? So it's not necessarily a negative thing. I think it's actually quite positive, and if it's done properly, probably motivating, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, David. When you're holding, the way this entire system works is it starts with the employee saying, this is what I want. This is where I want to go. And them setting the skill goals in their plan. And it is a much different conversation holding somebody accountable for what they said they wanted to do versus holding them accountable for things that you said you wanted them to do. And again, because the context of this entire conversation is we're talking about your career, and I'm here as a manager to support you in your career. And let's talk about making sure that you get things done and that's going to get you to that next level with more responsibility, with more pay, with more prestige, all the things that are going to come along with you progressing in your career, and why that's important to you. It just happens to be that when somebody is working through the system, that the business is also getting the right results. And so it goes from a carrot or from a stick to a carrot type of conversation. So the science of motivation would talk about the difference between intrinsic, that you want to have intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic motivation. And this is the way the entire system has been set up, is to play into that. So finally, we got to the end of the year. All of the things that are supposed to be happening are happening. And we've got out-of-the-box reports that you can simply bring into your presentation, throw them in your PowerPoint deck, and show throughout the organization, here's exactly what is happening. You can go into the detail and pull out some bright spots in terms of here's the skill profile of somebody in the system, and talk about how much Daniel has improved throughout the year, and here's all of the ways in which Daniel is engaged in the system. We have something in the system called a skill score, which is basically the roll up of all of the skills that are assigned to your role, and shows you the progress that's been made in those skills. We want that to go up to the right. The leader score, and this is the score that kind of holds the glue of the system all together, is how well are you doing turning your people into direct reports, or not into direct reports. How well are you doing developing your direct reports? So it gives you a score of not only what skills is everybody developing, but if they're a leader, how well are they doing developing people? Because that is the true indication that they are ready for that next role, because they're going to be a multiplier in that setup rather than somebody who's just good at their role. And there's a very flexible reporting engine that you can use to pull out any reports that you want, to show a direct connection between here's the energy and effort and money and time that we put into the system and our development efforts, and here is the output. Here are all the things that we accomplished, and in particular, here are the places where we added value to the business. All these places where we went from a 3 to a 4 and created true, tangible business results for the company. And that is exactly what your executives are looking for. And if you deploy the system from front to end, that is exactly what you're going to be able to give them.
So what else is really nice about, if you could just go back to that screen, Steve, if it's possible. So, if you're looking at new hires, creating new departments, downsizing, having a look at how people have learned their which is a sign of flexibility and skills, I think could really help an organization sort of overlay to where they want to apply talent, or maybe remove talent from the organization. Those are just harsh realities of business, and I think that this would be a really valuable tool, so that your C-levels can take a look, identify where some of the problems are, and eliminate some of the social connections, and actually make decisions based off of abilities and willingness, instead of some of the non-measurable things, like the guy's a joker or fun to have in the office, right? So I love that the versatility of some of that data there.
Yeah, that's a great point, David. One of the things that you're going to be able to do in the reporting, because of the way the system is being used, is who is adaptable, who is taking on new skills, who can level up themselves quickly, as an example, and who one of the other things you'll understand is who is resistant to change. And those are the types of people, especially moving forward. It's always true that the pace of change is increasing. That is just, again, like a truism. It's always true. But as we've seen over the last year, there are some points in time when that is especially true. And right now, that is especially true as we're trying to navigate what does the world look like for the next 2, 3, 5 years. And being able to understand in your organization who is going to be adaptable and who isn't is one of the most valuable things that you're going to understand. So that is what we wanted to show you here today. Thank you for taking the time to be here. We want to turn it over to any Q&A that you might have around the system. So if you would like us to take any questions, go ahead and throw your question into the chat box that you see on the screen. And we'll wrap things up here in a few minutes after these questions. And then for those of you who would like a custom demo of the platform and how we can help you create a more adaptive organization, and even potentially run one of those custom action classes for you so you can see that in action, go to www.adaptivegrowth.io And right on that homepage, you're going to see a nice shiny button to book a demo with us, and we'll be happy to do that for you. So we'll turn it over to Q&A right now, and then we'll get you on with your week.
Okay, so Steve, I have a couple questions here, and people can feel free to pipe in, but I don't see any questions right now. So, you know, in the beginning of your presentation, you talked about how people often go through the process of acquiring outside content or modules or training. How do you guys work with importing that into the workflow?
Yeah, so that would be part of our setting up of the skill model. We take whatever content you have. You may have different content libraries that need to be integrated into one place, and it really depends on the technical setup of the libraries that you've purchased. But we can work with most content libraries. We can work with even your learning management system as it is today, and layer this skill platform on top of it. So the way that we're able to work with you is no matter what stage of that progression that we talked about in the beginning, the system can handle it. And the more content you have, especially if it can be mapped to specific skills, that's the critical part of the system, is making clear, out of all of the stuff that you have, what is relevant to me as an employee right now. So that's what we would work through in an engagement with an organization.
Yeah, and another question that we had on the last presentation that I think was very fitting too is I think it was worded something along the line of I see that you've got some big companies like Toyota mentioned in the presentation, but what size of companies do you traditionally work with, or do you feel that you can help? And I believe that customer had 75 employees in the last call. So give us a bit about your model and who you think you're a good fit for.
Yeah, so we're a good fit for any organization that is ready to be clear about all of the roles and responsibilities inside of their organization. Certainly, we're a better fit for organizations that are 50 and above, and we work with organizations with a wide range of sizes beyond that. So typically what we would say is if you have hired your first dedicated HR employee, it's probably time to start looking at a system like this to make everything that's expected of folks in your organization crystal clear. And that's where the real value in using a system like this would come in.
And a question too here, what about hierarchy? I don't like to shout out anybody, so I'll sort of paraphrase it, but what about hierarchy? Who can see people's results and data, privacy, anything like that, if you could sort of touch on?
Yeah, so that's going to be part of the setup of the skill model. Is some organizations want to have complete transparency across the organization. Some of them want only for only for people to be able to see their own data and maybe their direct reports data. And so the system is flexible in order to set up whatever level of transparency and privacy that you would like in the platform. But what we would say is that the more transparency there is, the better off this system will be. And the reason why we say that is, some organizations get scared about sharing, as soon as there's a number, there's worry about letting everybody see everybody. But because the system is designed for very objective stages in each one of those things. So because you're at a 2, it doesn't mean you're a bad employee. What it means is that you're just at that stage of development right now in that skill. So it just is not the same thing as a performance rating. So we suggest to folks that the more you make it transparent, the more of that peer learning that can happen, because the 2s can go hunt out the 5s on their own. The 5s can go suggest to some 2s and 3s, here's a way that I can help you. And so the more you make this data available, the more folks can learn and adapt on their own, which is ultimately what we want to create. The more of those interactions we can create, the more adaptive your company gets. And as long as they're focused on, again, this progression to ultimately creating better results, and that's the context of the conversation they're happening, more transparency is better than less.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve. Is there any other questions? No, I don't see any. So I did just drop into the chat box in case anybody can't find it or is interested in the session that starts in roughly 9 minutes. If you haven't registered for it, it is by Optify Coaching. It's coach your leaders to drive organizational success. And so I put that link in there if you want to participate. But that's it for this webcast. I thank you for being on, Steve. Awesome job. It's so clear to me when every time I go through this, and it makes so much sense. I find it hard to believe that it's not a basic in every organization, really. So congrats for doing this.
Thanks for having me, David. Thanks, everybody.
All right, everybody. Thank you.